arrived at the third movement of the Mozart G major concerto. In this movement, I ask my students to practice and learn the orchestral introduction and the interludes. It gives them a sense of the whole and a sense of continuity. It establishes the backdrop, which the solo violin will then play over. Also, there's a lot of essential classical bowing style in this introduction. The separate eighth notes should be played spiccato, and mostly they're all up bow. Up, up, up. Get a good lift of the bow in these measures. Not like this, but like this. Measures 5, 6, and 7. This up bow note gets only a tiny bit of bow. Then the bow travels in the air, back to the starting point for the next measure. Not like this, but like this. Measure 16, up bow and down bow, up, down. Every time we have the appoggiatura, that two-note group is played with a down bow. Make sure you use enough bow so that both notes sound. Measure 26, up, 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 every time. It gives the music a lightness and an elegance that you can never get with a normal as-it-comes type bowing. As opposed to in this whole first section, the bow has a home where it hangs out. And that home is in the second quarter of the bow, from there to there. Or from there to there. If I occasionally go into the first quarter or the third quarter, I immediately come back home. Watch my bow carefully as I play the whole passage. This movement shows a side of Mozart that's very familiar to lovers of his operas. We find this kind of music in the crowd scenes. It could be a party, or it could be in the village square. The stage is filled with people, colorfully dressed, filled with energy, hustling and bustling, doing their thing. In the midst of all this, the main characters appear, carrying on their own personal dramatic stories, singing their own music, often at odds with what the orchestra and chorus are doing. So, finally the solo violin enters, taking on the persona of a Figaro or a Papageno. The style is a little different now. It's more singing and more expansive, more extroverted. I'm using more bow and feeling more physical freedom. Here's the famous Mozartian two-note slur, just like in the first movement. Meanwhile, I'm very aware of the rhythmic backdrop, which is a continuation of the beginning of the movement. measure 81. This passage needs to be practiced carefully. Much of this movement seems so easy technically that we start to take it for granted. Not a good idea. In the next video segment, Todd Hale gives a splendid and detailed demonstration of how to practice this passage. So I'm just going to skip ahead. Now we have some material from the orchestral introduction. But we can play it more soloistically, with more freedom and variety. Now finally the solo violin gets the first theme. My idea in this spot is that our operatic hero, who has all along been somewhat insensitive to the folks around him, is finally catching on and getting on their wavelength. At measure 42, we've modulated to the key of E minor. And we have a new element. This rhythmic figure, which is sometimes called the French jig, gives a little bit of a dance character to the music. Do you know what that reminds me of? That's from Vivaldi's Spring from the Four Seasons. In order to give this figure its proper character and elegance, we need to focus on the bow division. Big, small, big, small, big, small. Tucking in the small notes without losing the swing of the full measure unit. Let's jump ahead. At measure 252, we come to the andante section and then the allegretto, both of which seem to be unrelated to the rest of the movement. For me, once again, this says opera. I can see the curtain coming down and then a very short scene with two minor characters speaking in whispers, hatching a nefarious plot. Again, the orchestra sets the mood and the tempo, tiptoeing. And then the solo violin enters, whispering, flotando bow. Spooky, with lots of harmonics. Meanwhile, back in the outside world, life goes on. In Mozart's 18th century world, everything is very orderly and formal, at least on the surface. In fact, perhaps it's exaggeratedly formal. This next passage, at 269, is harder than it looks. You'll need to give that passage some practice time. This is another place that Todd Hale covers in great detail. Finally, at measure 291, we come back to familiar territory. No new surprises here, just reaffirming what happened before. At the end of the movement, again, I like to play the orchestral interlude. It's important to have a sense of the whole, even if it's just repetition. And then finally, the violin has the last word. So, this is the end of my segment on the last movement. Please continue with the next segment where Todd Ale covers a lot of the material I left out and gives some marvelous insights on how to practice. And then, please join the conversation by leaving your comments and questions in the comments.